Welcome to the Omnibus Show, a program for people who are interested in everything, with deep conversations on a wide variety of subjects. And now your host, Dave Gibbs.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the Omnibus Show, the program for people who are interested in everything, with deep conversations on a wide variety of subjects. Today's guest is Rob DeRocker, president of Rob DeRocker and Associates, based in Sleepy Hollow, New York, and St. Croix, United States Virgin Islands. Rob DeRocker and Associates is an economic development marketing consultant company with more than a quarter century worth of experience. Rob has served over 40 client communities, cities, regions, states, and countries, which include Carmel, Indiana. Rob, welcome. It's great to have you with us today.
Great to be here, Dave. And by the way, I love the name of your show, Omnibus. It's for better or worse, I'm interested in all kinds of things too, and sometimes that results in attention deficit disorder because so much captures my attention, but it also it can be a real blessing.
Well, I hear you. Well, thank you. And it's great to have you here. I see you just came in from St. Croix.
Yeah, I was there for a few days over the weekend. I do some work for the governor of the Virgin Islands, and they just celebrated the 175th anniversary of, in a way, their independence. They were the Danish West Indies. And on July 3rd, 1848, the slaves there in the Virgin Islands, or in St. Croix, marched and demanded their freedom. And the governor, who was Danish, granted it to them on the spot. So this was a commemoration that I was there for, and I had a reporter from Los Angeles who came in for that.
Well, that's great. Ending slavery is an excellent thing to celebrate. And they must have had a great celebration down there, especially with good weather.
Yeah, and the Caribbean was a particularly brutal place for it.
Yeah.
Because the heat and sugar canes and the Danes, they're among the happiest people in the world, but it was not a happy experience for the slaves back then. That's
understandable. Well, you have quite a career and life experience. Can you tell us how, your milestones along the way and what led you to marketing consultancy?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's more evolutionary than revolutionary.
Yes.
I grew up in upstate New York in a town that's a little bigger than the Empire State Building. But I wanted to be in New York City. And so NYU was, at the time, this is back in the late 70s, early 80s, the most legitimate excuse that I could come up with for moving to New York. And so I did, and that really set the stage. Before we went on air here, I mentioned that occasionally I'll go up for reunions, and people will say, "Are you still in New York, Rob?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm there." Like it down there, do you? They refer to it as if they're talking about some unspeakable part of the anatomy.
Oh, I see.
And I say, "Yeah, I do." Well, you wouldn't get me down there. A bunch of crazy people down there. But what I tell them is that while they're single and while they have no children, especially if they have urban interests and they get the chance to spend 1 year in New York City, they should jump all over it. So that was me. I came and then graduated in 1980 and got a couple of jobs with community newspapers. Then worked for Habitat for Humanity, and I can talk about that a bit later. And then eventually went into media and marketing and public relations.
Yes, I hear what you're saying because I did that myself, but I went to Seattle instead of New York. Although my nephew Chris actually went out for a number of years, several years, to New York City and was a dentist there, and I try to get out every year to see he and his girlfriend were there. They've now moved back to Indiana, but he loved it there, and we always had a great visit when I went out there to New York City. A great experience.
Well, you have to redefine quality of life if you're living in New York. Even if you're uber wealthy, which I'm definitely not. But if quality of life is the picket fence, and the 4,000 square feet, you're not going to find that in New York. But if quality of life is unlimited cultural opportunities,
Yes.
intellectual opportunities, social opportunities, professional opportunities, then a place, and it's not just New York, there are other cities, but I think New York is kind of the apex of that.
Yeah, and endless opportunities. Your wall behind you really speaks of that from your life experience, because you've helped so many communities throughout the world, and you've gone to so many places, and you've heard from so many people. Now, these are from cards that people have sent to you, correct?
Say that again?
These are cards that people have sent to you.
Oh, yeah, in the background, yeah. No, years ago, I set a goal of just had a quick inspiration to set a goal of sending 10,000 postcards, Lord willing, over the course of 30 years to friends and acquaintances. And my rationale for that was that these days everybody gets emails, instant messages, texts, chats, all electronically, but people don't get handwritten notes in the mail anymore. And for some people, that's really refreshing. They, even if in my case they can barely read them, they still get a smile when they get a postcard from wherever. And so I've encouraged people to send them to others, including me. And that's what that wall is. People from all over, from Malaysia, South Africa, Greece, and as close as New Jersey have sent me postcards.
That's fabulous.
And my thought is that, and I would encourage your listeners to do this as well. That if 5% of the people who receive those cards say it brightened their day, or it even made their day, that's a great return on investment, and I can guarantee it's probably more than 5%.
Yes, it's fascinating. I collect postcards myself, and I love to hear from friends and family when they're going abroad or if they're going someplace. It's a great moment. I don't look at it as collecting people or collecting things, but it's moments that you can share with family and friends, which makes it a very special thing.
Yeah, and it's a novelty today.
It is.
It used to be. I mean, back in the day, I heard that people could drop a postcard in the mail in the morning and say, "Meet me for lunch," and they would get it. And but obviously that's not the case anymore. But
Yeah,
it's people don't get cards or handwritten notes or anything like that, and they get bills, but that's about it. And so it's refreshing. So it's not my life mission, but I enjoy doing it.
exactly. So could you share with us a little bit, I'll go in the next chapter about Carmel, but in all of these, the reaches from all the locales that you've had, just a little general knowledge about the economic development marketing consultancy, and like you'd mentioned St. Croix and other places. Like, what does your consultancy, what do you do for the cities, the towns, the countries?
Well, in the United States alone, there's some 15 to 20,000 economic development entities. Everybody is in the game now trying to attract investment, or more recently, trying to attract the talent that will draw the investment, because companies go where the people are, and so you have to distinguish yourself if you're going to do that, because it's a lot of chasing either of those of that talent or of the companies that would invest in those communities. And so you look for what makes you distinctive. I work particularly on the media end, and there you look for, you're in the media yourself. You look for what I call the man bites dog story, and something that makes it unique. And in Carmel has been full of man bites dog, and it's a Midwest Republican, largely Republican suburb that's doing incredibly visionary things in its development, and that's led by Mayor Brainerd. He's been a real visionary, but doing European-like development in what would ordinarily be a kind of an anodyne suburb, focusing on the arts as a tool for economic development. You're sitting in one of those places.
Yes.
It's just been a great story all the way around.
Yeah, that's quite.
And then of course there's roundabouts. Your audience outside of Indiana may not know, but Carmel has more roundabouts than any other city in the country.
We do.
And there are all kinds of benefits to those. Years ago, we had there was the International Roundabout Society that was having an annual meeting in Carmel. There's an international society for everything, and this one was for roundabouts. And so I wrote to media all over and said, let me take a wild guess. This is the first International Roundabout Society annual meeting you've ever been invited to. And CNN got back to me and they said, yeah, you're right. This is not really our story. But then they called later in the afternoon and said, yeah, this actually is our story. We're very interested in this. So they sent a crew. They came. The mayor was in the driver's seat. And we did a tour with the cameraman in the passenger seat. We did a tour of Carmel, and it ended up on Anderson Cooper's show.
How fun!
Now, yeah, it didn't hurt that Anderson Cooper's show is called 360, but it was, and then things have followed from there. The New York Times did a front page story, because there are all kinds of benefits of roundabouts, not just safety, but environmentally and traffic flow and everything else. So, that's just one element that you wouldn't expect in a, Midwest city, Midwest suburb.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And I have to admit, Jeff Worrell, who's with the city council, was one of my earlier guests. Mm-hmm. And we spoke actually about starting a sister city that would be related to roundabouts. And so we'll see how that moves forward. But you've certainly had quite an impact on this imprint on Carmel, moving from a suburban town to a city, let's say a destination city of its own. You tell people Indianapolis, and a lot of internationals think the 500, but Carmel is now becoming its own persona. And that's a good thing, because I think that a lot of suburbans, and you would have a really good understanding of this, would you see this, that a lot of suburban locations are actually developing their own destination personalities, and Carmel is certainly one of those.
Well, as the mayor said, when after World War II, we threw out everything we knew about how to develop a city for 10,000 years and oriented cities toward the automobile.
Yes.
Um, Now it's going the other way because people want a sense of they're there and a place with communal gathering. We're communal people, and it's hard to get that if you're driving up. Years ago, I interviewed Russell Baker, who was the Pulitzer Prize winning columnist for the New York Times, and he said that most of his work life was spent in a suburb of Washington, and he said you'd drive to the supermarket that was so vast that the fog obscured the horizon over the vegetable counter. And then you got back in your car and you didn't have any real human interaction.
Yes.
You to go back to your suburban home, and people crave that. And so that's what's the mayor and the council have developed in Carmel. It's meeting spaces and places where people walk instead of drive, and that's especially younger people today and the kind of talented people that you want to attract to a community. That's what they crave, and so that's become one of the signatures for a place like Carmel.
Yeah. Well, our Monon Boulevard is more and more becoming, I think, our center of town. From City Hall or through the main streets, and that was the old Monon train line.
Yeah. The mayor, he's got this wonderful presentation where he's trying to attract corporate headquarters or regional headquarters, and he'll show a PowerPoint where he starts out showing a picture of La Jolla. With the boats bobbing in the water and eternally 70 degrees and, gorgeous weather. And he says, that's not Carmel. And then he shows a picture of Aspen with the cathedral of snow and skiers. And he said, that's not Carmel either. And then he says, he shows a picture of a cornfield. And he said, if this is your palette, if you don't have mountains, you don't have oceans, you got to focus on the built environment and create a beautiful city that people want to be in and move to and come to. And then he concludes by showing a picture of the Eiffel Tower. And he said, they didn't have much either. The dirty brown river, it's flat, but that city's done okay. And that's the point he makes. That and they've done that with in Carmel, and as you said, a lot of other cities and suburbs are doing the same thing.
That's fascinating, and you've had an important part on that, and we thank you for that, Rob.
I tell the story. I help the mayor tell the story.
Yes,
but and the city. But the story itself is what is being done right there on the ground.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. We will carry on with some more stories in Chapter 2. And right now we're going to take a break from the Omnibus Show with Rob DeRocker. Well, welcome back to the Omnibus Show in Chapter 2. In this episode with Rob DeRocker, who is the president of Rob DeRocker and Associates, an economic development marketing consultant company. Now, Rob, you were talking about roundabouts, and you had mentioned in our conversation about there's an appreciation society that mentioned Carmel. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, there was a roundabout appreciation society based in England, and as the mayor said that it may consist of 6 guys in a pub, but they do a calendar every year, and they named one of Carmel's roundabouts Roundabout of the Year. Who knew? And they ran it as their the feature picture in December in the calendar. So I sent out a pitch that said, "My client is Miss December," and that it got quite a few chuckles, but also
Miss December.
some pickup
Yeah.
on that. And and then I had to explain that, well, it's not exactly my client, but my client's roundabouts, and but they're on a more serious note, there are all kinds of benefits from roundabouts, and as you know, Carmel has more than any other city in the world, and it people, it takes some adjustment for drivers, but once they do adjust, as the mayor said, he would lose votes if he tried to take one out now.
Yeah. I always tell people that it really requires civics, so it kind of teaches us civics. It helps with traffic, but also a lot of people weren't brought up with it, and it challenges a lot of people who weren't brought up with driving in roundabouts. That you really have to be civic and understand, when to stop, when it's okay to drive through, and sometimes you have to let the other person go because they have the momentum and they're in there. So it kind of teaches you how to be in the moment. And so,
well, the biggest benefit by far is safety. Because people are moving slower, the type of accidents that do occur are much less serious than ones that happen at normal traditional intersections, which tend to be T-bones. So there's an 80% reduction in injury-related accidents at roundabouts compared with a general intersection.
Well, we here in Carmel have actually, where this is true, we have an intersection, Pennsylvania and 111th Street, which was infamous because it's dark. It's lit up now, but it has the roundabout and it's more lit up now. But it used to be dark, and there are always crack ups when you drive through there, and it's just one of those blind spots for accidents. Now you never see any accidents there. So yeah, that testifies to your point. If there is someone who is, not everybody does this, but what you've helped so many communities and ours. If somebody was wanting to get into the consultancy, what would you recommend a pathway for pursuing that? Because it's like you've really done a lot for Carmel and all these other communities throughout the world.
Well, every community has something distinctive about it, and if you're going about trying to attract either investment from companies, or more currently, the talent that companies want these days, then you need to find what's distinctive about your community, and promote that through a variety of means. So certainly social media and general media, public relations, and then reach out to the experts, the consultants who advise companies on where to locate their businesses. And that's something that I've been doing with Carmel as well as other communities. But it's not brain surgery, but it is a specialized form of marketing. And you have to, like any product, you got to know your product, but you also have to know your audience. And there, it's not the 10 million. If you're a car company, your audience is the 10 million people who, or 10 billion people who drive cars. But if you're an economic developer, it's the handful of corporate executives and consultants who advise those executives that you're really trying to reach, as well as the young people who have the talent to bring into your community.
Thank you very much. I know there's a lot to learn from this, but again, you've done a lot for Carmel, and thank you for that, and all these other locations throughout the world. Now, you have other interests. I understand you've been the executive director for Habitat for Humanity in New York, and you recruited a former president. Can you tell us about your story?
Sure. Well, it's come up more recently because the former president is in hospice, and it's given a lot of people a chance to reflect on his life. But I was the 23-year-old executive director of the first Habitat for Humanity project in New York City. And I think I got chosen. I didn't know nothing about nothing. And I think I got chosen because I was unemployed. But I became that director, and we were rebuilding a 6-story building on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, and we didn't have, we had like $10,000 in the bank for a project that would have eventually cost upwards of $1 million. And we had no idea where that was gonna come from. But one day I was reading the daily news and saw that former President Carter, was going to be in New York to attend the 25th anniversary of the installation of the Greek Archbishop. And so I knew that he had expressed some interest in Habitat. So I tore out the article, sent it to the founder of Habitat for Humanity down in Georgia, Millard Fuller. And I said, wouldn't it be great if President Carter could stop by our project when he comes to New York? Ha, ha, ha. Well, he called me at 7 o'clock in the morning, Millard Fuller did, and said, I got news for you. President Carter's going to come to your project. So my instructions were to meet him at the Waldorf Astoria in the presidential suite, and then we were going to get in the car and go down to the Lower East Side where he was going to tour the building. Well, I don't know about you, but I had never been in the presence of someone of that stature before. And I didn't even have a suit. I went, I think, to the Salvation Army to get a suit, and then I bought it for $1, and it looked like it was worth $1 to meet this former leader of the free world, and looked like something Al Capone would have worn. But anyway, I meet him at the Waldorf Astoria, and I was so nervous. It was as if somebody had stuck a vacuum cleaner hose into my mouth and sucked out all the moisture. And then he shows up, and he said, he said hello. And then I kind of kicked it in, and I said, Mr. President, if you don't come back to New York for any other reason, you have to come back for Junior's cheesecakes. They make the best cheesecakes anywhere. So I started pulling these things out of a bag, and I said, this one's for you and Mrs. President. I didn't even know what to call her. And I said, this one's for your appointment secretary, and this is for these big guys for keeping you safe. And I pointed to the Secret Service. Well, Dave, you can read somebody's bubble thoughts. I mean, he was very gracious, and he said, well, thank you, Rob. That's very nice. Thank you very much. But I'm sure his bubble thoughts were, am I in New York City? This is the hokiest thing I've ever experienced in my life. But anyway, we get in the car, we go down to the Lower East Side, climb up the 6 stories in a wooden staircase in this building because the junkies it was an abandoned building, and the junkies had taken out the marble slats to sell them. And so we had to put up a temporary wooden staircase, and we get up to the roof, and he looks out and looks south and sees the then World Trade Center and Wall Street. Then he looks north and he sees Midtown Manhattan, takes in, of course, all the power and money and global influence that those two areas in Manhattan represent. But then he looks in the rubble-strewn backyard of this abandoned building, and he sees an elderly woman cooking her breakfast over an open fire. And that moved him, and he would later write about it and say, here in the richest city in the richest country on earth, we have this in the shadow of Wall Street. So we get down to the car, and he says, Rob, Millard Fuller is my boss. And he said, if there's any way I can help you here, you just let him know. So I said, I just blurted out, well, thanks, Mr. President. Maybe you can send a couple of volunteer carpenters from your church or something. He said, we'll think about it. He thought about it for a day, called Millard Fuller, and said that not only was he going to send some carpenters, he was going to be one of the carpenters. And then several months later, he came up on a Trailways bus with a group full of volunteers. And that's when the whole Jimmy Carter Work Party, which became an annual event in various spots around the world, started. And because it was in New York, the media capital of the world, it just garnered all kinds of attention and really put Habitat on the map overnight. Now you have sitting presidents who will at least take a few ceremonial hammer swings at a Habitat project. But back then, the notion that a former leader of the free world would sleep on a bunk bed in a church in Hell's Kitchen and then commute to the Lower East Side to spend a full day working as a volunteer carpenter was just unheard of. So the press couldn't get enough of this. And that, of course, helped with the visibility of Habitat that continues to this day.
Wow, recruiting a president for a project, that's a gold milestone. Congratulations. And that really was, I think, much of his post-president's legacy. And of course...
I think somewhat to his chagrin, because it this very visible, and he's done in his post-presidency, he's done all kinds of things, including election monitoring around the world.
That's true.
And, the Carter Center helped to eliminate river blindness caused by the Guinea worm in Africa, and they've done just all kinds of things. But most visible has been his work with Habitat, which, continued, I think, up until about 2 years ago.
Yes.
He took a fall and showed up and it was all bruised, but showed up at a Habitat project, I think, in Nashville.
Wow.
And continues to do that.
Yes,
he's a remarkable human being, and it'll be a loss for the whole world when he passes.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for that story. That is a remarkable story, and it really brings it's a lesson for us in national and international civics, and it's a beautiful story. Well, thanks so much. Well, Rob, what would you like to tell us? Any projects that's coming up, and that are coming up in the near future, and we'd love to hear about, because you're in all these communities.
Well, we can continue to promote Carmel as a place to live and a place for companies to invest, and I'll continue to do that. And come January of next year, you're going to have a new mayor for the first time in like 28 years. And so that will allow him or her to establish their own stamp. But they're going to be following, the huge shoes in Mayor Brainerd.
Yes.
But there are still all kinds of possibilities for promoting that city. And I'm also working with the U.S. Virgin Islands and the governor. They were hit by two back-to-back Category 5 hurricanes in 2017.
Yes.
Which is unprecedented. I mean, within 10 days or 2 weeks, those hurricanes came and at a Category 5 strength. And we're going to see more of this, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But they've gotten a lot of federal money, and they are rebuilding. And I guess what I would encourage your viewership to do is to get down there and visit. There's all kinds of history, especially in St. Croix. and we have a home there, so it's, I'm kind of biased, but there's tremendous history. A lot of people don't know that Alexander Hamilton grew up there.
That is true.
And he later attributed all that he knew when he became Secretary of Treasury. He attributed all that he knew about world commerce to his experience running his uncle's store on St. Croix as a teenager.
Another great story.
It's remarkable. He was 17, and there was a devastating hurricane on the island. He wrote about it in a letter to his father. You can still find the letter. Just Google Alexander Hamilton's letter from St. Croix. You can still find it online. It was a remarkable piece of writing, an account of the hurricane that with parts that resonate even today. But when the businessman, the letter was intercepted by a mentor of his who had ties to Princeton University. And he asked Alexander if he could publish it in a Danish-American newspaper, which he did anonymously. But when the businessmen of St. Croix read the letter, they said, who did this? When it was revealed to be 17-year-old Alexander Hamilton, they said, this kid has a future. And they pooled their resources and had him sent to New York, or originally to Princeton. He was an arrogant little twit, and he told Princeton he wanted to graduate in considerably less than the 4 years, but Princeton said no. He told them what they could do with their diploma then, crossed the river, went into King's College, which is now Columbia University, formed a militia, became Washington's aide-de-camp, and you know the rest of the story.
Yeah.
But if it hadn't been for a hurricane on St. Croix, world history would be different.
It's
so
amazing.
That's just one aspect of the history. And a good friend of mine, Wayne Nichols, does Alexander Hamilton tours dressed as Hamilton there. It's also the only place on what is now American soil that Columbus is known to have landed. And it was certainly the first place on his second voyage. He named St. Croix Santa Cruz, and when it fell under the French, they named it St. Croix, and that's why it's called St. Croix to this day.
Yes.
But it's been under 7 flags, so it's just all kinds of history, including what I referenced at the beginning of the show on that island. And of course, it's a gorgeous place, and it's quirky. I tell people if they're looking for Club Med, if they want some guy with rippling muscles named Armando telling him it's time for volleyball at 10 o'clock, they have the wrong island. They should go to a place where they see chickens running in the street.
Yes.
But it's a beautiful place. So that's, I guess, in terms of projects, maybe a lifelong project is to encourage people to get down to St. Croix.
Well, fabulous. Well, if you need a volunteer, give me a call. Well, that sounds great. Well, thank you, Rob. Thank you for being with us today. We would like to.
It's my pleasure.
It's great having you.
And I look forward to being in Carmel. I think that I mentioned that my wife is a singer, Melinda DeRocker, and she's coming with her jazz trio on September 17th. They're doing a performance right where you're sitting, and that will. So I'll be out there, and I'll look forward to meeting you.
Fabulous. We look forward to seeing you and your wife and their team. We can put the link up in the description when we post the show, and so look forward to it. Thank you, Rob. Thank you very much.
All right. You have a good day.
We'd like to thank our sponsor, Hotel Carmichael. Today we're shooting from Feinstein's, and Rob DeRocker, our guest. We're grateful to have him. He's the president of Rob DeRocker and Associates. We look forward to seeing you on our next episode of the Omnibus Show.
If you enjoyed this program, please like, share, and subscribe to continue the conversation. For the Omnibus Show newsletter, please sign up at theomnibusshow.com.